At 11 o'clock at night, my husband slapped me across the face because there was no food on the table. He screamed, "Hurry up and serve dinner, you useless woman!" I walked in and out of the kitchen for 20 minutes without saying a single word. When I finally returned with a covered serving tray, they thought it would be a delicious meal. But when the lid was lifted, there was no food inside, only a one-way ticket to hell for them. The clock on the living room wall read 11:10 at night. Outside the house, absolute silence reigned. The only sound was the tires of my car grazing the asphalt of the driveway. I felt as if my entire body was about to shatter. I had spent the whole day at the office wrestling with a stack of audit documents that had to be ready by the next morning. A sharp pain throbbed in my head, like a hammer striking repeatedly, but I forced myself to fake a faint smile, imagining the plush bed that would soon welcome me. All I wanted was a hot shower and uninterrupted sleep. I killed the engine and stumbled toward the front door. The house keys jingled in my hand, which was trembling slightly from exhaustion. As the door opened, the cold blast from the central air conditioning hit me square in the face. It was strange. Usually at this hour, the living room lights should have been off, but tonight every lamp was blazing. Suddenly, I had a bad feeling. My steps halted at the threshold as I saw 3 people sitting on the living room sofa with indecipherable expressions. My husband, Javon, sat in the center with his legs crossed in arrogance. To his right, my mother-in-law, Miss Eudora, shot me a sharp, judgmental glare, and to his left, my sister-in-law, Takara, was fiddling with her phone, eyeing me sideways with a mocking smirk every few seconds. Before I could even say hello, Javon jumped up and strode toward me with long, aggressive steps. His face was beet red, his jaw tight. Seeing the veins bulging in his neck, I knew his emotions were about to erupt. "Honey, I just got home from work." Before I could finish the sentence, a heavy slap landed on my left cheek. Smack! The sound was so loud, it shattered the silence of the living room. In an instant, a stinging heat spread across my face. The blow was so forceful, my head snapped to the side. I froze on the spot. The exhaustion that had been weighing down my body seemed to vanish, replaced by the shock of the impact. My right hand, clutching my increasingly numb cheek, trembled. I looked at Javon, trying to find a shred of guilt in his eyes, but there was none. Only a flash of fury ready to explode. "Do you know what time it is, you cheap tramp?" Javon screamed right in my face. His spit flecked my hair. "Who do you think you are coming in at this hour? What are you doing out there in the streets while your husband waits at home?" I swallowed the tears, fighting to escape. "Baby, I've been working late. You know it's the end of the month and I'm swamped. I had a lot of work. Plus, I texted you this afternoon," I replied, my voice shaking but trying to remain calm. I didn't want to look weak in front of them. Ms. Eudora cut me off with a voice sharp as a razor. The middle-aged woman rose from the sofa and pointed a finger in my face. "What kind of wife are you? We've been sitting here for an hour starving to death. There isn't a single plate of food on the table. The pots are empty, and the fridge only has cold water. You're trying to starve my son and grandchildren on purpose, aren't you?" Takara chimed in without taking her eyes off her phone screen, as if I were less important than a social media video. "Get a grip, sis. Javon has been tired all day resting at home. A wife is supposed to buy food on the way back from work or cook something. How can you walk in empty-handed? You're useless." I looked at them one by one. Javon, my unemployed husband, who lied to the neighbors saying he had started a business after being fired 6 months ago for embezzling company funds. Ms. Eudora, my mother-in-law, who demanded thousands of dollars a month for her expenses without lifting a single dirty plate in this house. And Takara, my 25-year-old sister-in-law, whose only job was to sleep, eat, and shop online with my supplementary credit card. All of them lived off my sweat. All of them breathed under the roof of this house, the mortgage of which I paid every single month. And now they were screaming at me because I came home late to make them dinner. "Go cook something right now, you useless woman!" Javon yelled again. This time he shoved me roughly by the shoulder, making me stumble back until I bumped into the shoe rack. Don't you dare come out of that kitchen until there is a delicious meal on the table, and it better be good or I'll throw the plates in your face." I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the anger starting to burn in my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to vomit all the rage I had been holding back. I wanted to kick them out of the house right then and there. But no, acting on impulse would ruin my plan. I needed to stay calm, to get revenge in the most painful way possible for them. An elegant revenge they wouldn't forget for the rest of their lives. I straightened up and fixed my messy hair. I looked Javon directly in the eyes. In me, there was no longer a trace of fear or sadness, only a cold, empty stare. "All right," I said in a low but firm voice. "Y'all hungry? Give me 20 minutes. I'll prepare a special dish for you tonight, the one you deserve the most." Without waiting for their response, I walked past Javon, ignoring Ms. Eudora's mocking look and Takara's sarcastic laugh, and headed straight for the kitchen, the place where I used to spend hours serving them like a maid. But tonight would be different. Tonight, the smell of delicious soul food wouldn't be coming out of this kitchen. Tonight, this kitchen would be the place where I cooked up their ruin. As soon as I reached the kitchen, I closed the door firmly. Leaning my back against it, I closed my eyes for a moment to gather my strength. The sting on my cheek persisted, but the wound in my heart was much more painful. During these 5 years of marriage, I had always tried to be a devoted wife. I turned a blind eye to Javon's laziness. I tried to understand Ms. Eudora's complaints and gave in to Takara's immature behavior. I thought if I had patience, they would change. I was completely wrong. My patience had done nothing but feed the monster inside them. They became greedier, crueler, and more shameless. I opened my eyes. The tears I had held back earlier had dried up completely. It wasn't worth crying over parasites like them. I headed to a drawer in the corner of the kitchen, the place where I had kept important things I had been hiding. Enough is enough. This low-budget drama has to end tonight. I made noise on purpose, clashing the knife against the cutting board. Chop, 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 chop. The rhythm filled the kitchen and pierced through the walls to the living room. I knew exactly what they were thinking out there. They were surely smiling with satisfaction, thinking I had folded again. They probably thought this foolish wife was hurriedly chopping onions or meat to fill their demanding stomachs, scared to death. But on the kitchen counter, not a single ingredient had been touched. The large knife was just repeatedly hitting an empty cutting board. It was part of the show. I wanted them to feel on top of the world before making them fall into the deepest abyss. While I kept making fake noises, my other hand was busy preparing the real dinner. I pulled out a large silver platter that I normally only used for special family occasions like Thanksgiving. The tray shone under the kitchen light. On it, I placed no red beans and rice or side dishes. There were no smothered pork chops, no candied yams, nor the honey-glazed ham they usually demanded. Instead, I took a thick envelope from a secret drawer under the sink, an envelope I had prepared 3 months ago, waiting for the right moment. I opened the envelope and took out 3 important documents. First, the property deed to this house. I originally bought this house with my savings, but Javon insisted I put his name as a co-owner to feel respected as the man of the house. However, last month, after paying the final installment with my year-end bonus, I secretly initiated the process to transfer the ownership completely to my name. The process was complicated and expensive, but fortunately, I knew a trusted notary who could get the job done quickly and without Javon finding out. This document was proof that every brick, every tile, and every inch of land on this property belonged to me. Second, the divorce papers. This document was already stamped. It detailed the grounds for divorce: verbal abuse, the physical violence that had just occurred, fortunately recorded by the security camera I installed in the living room a week ago, and financial abandonment. I was fed up with supporting a man who only knew how to give orders. Third, a stack of bank statements as thick as a notebook. On them, I had highlighted in bright fluorescent marker all the transactions leaving my account to maintain their lifestyle. Javon's car note for his SUV, the monthly allowance Ms. Eudora used for her church hats and social clubs, the charges on my supplementary credit card that Takara used to buy designer bags and Jordans, and even the money for Javon's cigarettes and gas. Everything was meticulously recorded. The total sum was astronomical, enough to buy a small house in the suburbs. It was irrefutable proof that I was the head of this family, not Javon. I arranged these 3 documents neatly on the tray, the deed in the center, the divorce papers on the left, and the transfer receipts on the right. Then I covered it with a shiny silver dome lid. Perfect. At first glance, it looked like a fancy dinner from a 5-star restaurant. I glanced at my wristwatch. Exactly 20 minutes had passed. It was time for the main show to begin. I lifted the tray with both hands. Its weight was nothing compared to the weight of the life I had been enduring, but I felt it was the most beautiful burden I had ever lifted. I took a deep breath and, with a blank face, kicked the kitchen door open. In the dining room, the 3 of them were already sitting docilely around the table. Their faces looked impatient. The silverware was already in their hands, ready to devour whatever meal I served them. When they saw me come out with the large covered tray, Ms. Eudora's eyes lit up. "That's how I like it," said Ms. Eudora, readjusting herself in her seat with sarcasm. "A wife needs to be quick on her feet. She shouldn't just make money, but also prioritize the stomachs of her husband and in-laws." Javon snorted with a sullen face that still reflected his earlier anger. "You took too long. I hope it tastes as good as the time we waited. If it's bland, get ready to make it again." Takara even craned her neck. "What is it, sis? I don't smell anything from here. You didn't just make instant noodles, did you?" I didn't answer a word. I placed the tray in the center of the table slowly, with a majestic gesture. The sound of the tray touching the glass table silenced them for a moment. I stood tall at the head of the table, looking at them one by one with a gaze that made Javon feel a little intimidated. He probably felt a drastic shift in my aura. "Go ahead, help yourselves," I said briefly. "This is the best dish I can offer you tonight. Eat it all up." Impatient, Javon reached out and roughly lifted the silver lid. The sound of the lid clattering onto the table echoed loudly in the eerie silence that suddenly took over the room. There was no hot steam or smell of spices to whet the appetite. On the tray, there was only a pile of papers. Javon's eyes widened like saucers when he saw the papers. He squinted, trying to read the letters on the top document. His face, previously red with anger, turned pale as he recognized the logo and the title at the top of the page. What is all this?" His voice trembled, not from anger, but from confusion and a budding panic. Ms. Eudora, with her far-sightedness, snatched the thickest stack of papers. "Where is the food? Why are you giving us newspapers? Have you lost your mind, Aziza?" But when she saw the figures marked in highlighter on the bank statements, her eyes bulged. What is this?" Takara, who caught on to the situation faster, grabbed the divorce papers directly, skimmed them, and looked at me with her mouth hanging open. "Javon, she wants a divorce!" she screamed hysterically. The atmosphere exploded in an instant. Javon threw the house deed he was holding onto the table, stood up, and pointed a shaking finger in my face. "Divorce papers? Who do you think you are to divorce me? And this? This is the house deed. Why is only your name on it? Where is mine? Did you trick me?" I smiled, a very sweet smile, but cold and piercing. "Enjoy reality, Javon. Ms. Eudora, Takara, fill your stomachs looking at those numbers. That is the amount of my money you have been squandering," I said, staring straight into Javon's eyes. "This house is mine, legally and morally. I kept the original document safe in the bank deposit box this morning. That is just a copy, so tearing it up won't do you any good." Then I turned my gaze toward Ms. Eudora, who was starting to shake while holding the transfer receipts. "And starting this moment, I am kicking all of you out of my house." "By what right are you kicking us out?" screamed Ms. Eudora. Her voice was so shrill my ears rang. This is my son's house. Javon is the man of the house. You are just a freeloader." "Man of the house?" I chuckled, a laugh that sounded pathetic. What man of the house feeds his family with his wife's money? What man of the house allows his mother to insult his wife? You should know, Ms. Eudora, that Javon hasn't contributed a single dollar to this house for a year. Even the electric bill lighting up your head right now is paid by me." Javon growled. His hands clenched into fists, as if ready to strike me again. He rounded the table and approached me. His intention to hurt me was evident. "You insolent! If you don't take back what you said, What are you going to do?" I challenged him. I didn't step back an inch. On the contrary, I lifted my chin, provoking him. "Hit me again. Go ahead. The security camera in the corner up there already recorded you slapping me in the living room earlier. If you lay a hand on me one more time, that footage will automatically upload to the cloud and send to my lawyer's phone. Besides the divorce papers, do you want a bonus criminal charge for domestic violence?" Javon's steps halted dead in their tracks. He lifted his head and saw the small camera blinking with a red light in the corner of the room. His face transformed into a mix of fear and extreme hatred. He realized he had walked into my trap. "Get out!" I said coldly. "Right now!" The silence my threat had created lasted only a few seconds before breaking into a deafening uproar. Ms. Eudora was the first to lose her composure. The elderly woman, who always maintained an elegant image in front of her church friends, was now screaming like a woman possessed. With her wrinkled hands, she swept all the papers off the table, scattering them on the floor. Her face was bathed in tears, not of sadness, but of rage. She felt humiliated by the daughter-in-law she had considered a walking ATM. She couldn't accept the reality that her luxurious life was vanishing in the blink of an eye. Ms. Eudora pounded the table repeatedly with her palms. Her voice was broken, accusing me of being a first-class scammer. She claimed I had manipulated Javon, that I had used voodoo or black magic, or that I had stolen his assets taking advantage of her son's oversight. The accusation sounded ridiculous to me. How was I going to scam Javon if he had no assets? From the spoons and forks in this house to the car in the garage, I had bought everything with the sweat of my brow. But logic didn't seem to work for them anymore, plunged into the panic of losing their livelihood. Javon, who had been momentarily cowed by the camera threat, now started pacing around the dining room like a caged beast. He pulled at his hair in frustration. His eyes darted around the room frantically, as if looking for an escape route to reverse the situation. He picked up the copy of the house deed scattered on the floor, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it at me. The paper ball hit my shoulder without hurting me and bounced off, but it showed how powerless he felt in that moment. He realized he had no legal ground to refute me. The documents were real, the transfer proofs were clear, and he knew perfectly well he had been living off my money all this time. The immature sister-in-law, Takara, reacted differently, but just as annoyingly. Instead of screaming or making a scene, she hugged the designer bag she had just bought last week, with my credit card, of course, and started crying hysterically. She clung to her brother, begging him to do something. She was afraid of becoming homeless, of not being able to flex on social media anymore, that her friends would find out she wasn't actually rich. Her sobs gave me a headache, but at the same time they produced a strange satisfaction in me. Finally, the girl felt fear for her future, the same fear that always tormented me every time I saw the credit card bills inflated because of her. I let them vent their emotions for a few minutes. I stood at the end of the table with my arms crossed, enjoying the spectacle of the ruin of a family of parasites. When I considered it was enough, I walked toward a corner of the room. There, behind the long window curtains, I had hidden something. I pulled out 3 large black trash bags, filled to the brim. They were industrial-strength garbage bags. I dragged the bags to the center of the room. The sound of the plastic grazing the tiled floor made them turn their heads. With all my strength, I threw the bags at them one by one. Thud, thud, thud. The 3 large bags landed right at their feet. Javon jumped back, startled. Ms. Eudora stopped screaming, and Takara stopped crying for a moment. They looked at the trash bags with confused expressions. A faint smell of mothballs mixed with dust emanated from the bags. "Those are your things," I said with a flat, emotionless voice. "I already packed everything this afternoon while you were at the mall. I put your clothes, pants, shoes, and personal items I consider important in there. The rest of the stuff I consider trash or that I bought with my money, but you don't deserve to take. I've already thrown in the dumpster out front or set aside to sell secondhand. You don't need to go up to your rooms to pack. Your rooms are already locked, and I threw away the keys. You no longer have access to any space in this house except this dining room and the front door." Takara screamed hysterically and ripped one of the plastic bags open immediately. The contents spilled out. Wrinkled clothes stuffed in any which way, pairs of shoes piled without boxes, cosmetics thrown in without a bag. She cried even harder seeing her collection of expensive clothes treated like kitchen trash. She protested, saying that folding clothes like that would ruin them, but I didn't care. To me, they were just garbage I had to get out of my house as soon as possible. Ms. Eudora looked at me with disbelief, as if I had just turned into a monster. She brought her hand to her chest and feigned a heart attack. She breathed with difficulty, hoping I would soften and cancel the eviction. Before, this method always worked. Every time I got angry, she pretended to be sick, and I would apologize immediately and take care of her. But this time, I just looked at her coldly. I knew the results of her last checkup last month. Her heart was perfectly healthy. The only thing sick was her heart, full of envy and jealousy. Javon tried to approach me again, this time with a fake, pleading tone. He lowered his voice and tried to grab my hand, but I snatched it away roughly. He started rambling about the sweet memories of our marriage, the sacred vows we once made, the rumors the neighbors would spread if we divorced. He tried to manipulate my emotions using his old weapons, pity and the fear of social embarrassment. But he forgot that the heart of a woman wounded repeatedly eventually hardens like a rock. There was no longer any crack for Javon to slip through. I glanced at my wristwatch. 5 minutes had passed since I gave them the ultimatum. I took my phone out of my pocket, tapped the screen a couple of times, and showed them the screen with the emergency call button connecting to the estate's security gatehouse. I looked at Javon harshly and gave him a final warning with no room for negotiation. "My patience has run out, and I don't want to waste any more time on this cheap drama. Take those trash bags and get the hell out of my house right now." My order was sharp. "I'm going to count to 10. If you are still here, I will press this call button. The estate security guards will come and drag you out by force. Imagine the shame of being dragged out like thieves in front of the neighbors. The choice is yours. Walk out on your own 2 feet with the little dignity you have left, or be thrown out by force while the whole neighborhood enjoys the free show. 1, 2, 3. Javon froze. His face was white as a sheet. He looked for hesitation in my eyes, but he didn't find it. He saw a murderous sincerity. With trembling hands, he grabbed one of the large plastic bags. He yelled at Takara to stop crying and help him move the stuff. He also helped his mother up, who was still pretending to be short of breath. They finally realized I wasn't joking. The queen of the house had awakened, and her orders were absolute. The front door opened wide, revealing the dense darkness of the night. A strong wind blew directly in, carrying with it raindrops that were starting to fall heavily. Nature, as if supporting my plan to cleanse this house of filth, unleashed a sudden storm the moment they walked out. In the distance, the rumble of thunder could be heard, as if marking the rhythm of my heart, which beat powerfully from the adrenaline. I stood in the doorway to ensure they really left with the trash bags containing their meager possessions. Javon walked in front with a large black plastic bag on his shoulder. He looked like a defeated man, far from the arrogant husband who had slapped me. His shirt was soaked by the splashing rain, his hair was plastered down, and his face was tilted to hide the rage and shame. Behind him, Takara dragged her plastic bag reluctantly. Every now and then, she let out a curse word under her breath when the bottom of the bag snagged on the driveway pavement. Miss Eudora walked stumbling without carrying anything. She tried to maintain what little dignity she had left by walking with her chin up, although her body was starting to shiver from the night wind. As soon as Ms. Eudora's last foot crossed the threshold, I slammed the heavy wooden door shut. Bam! The boom of the door closing was the signal of the end of a dark chapter in my life. I immediately threw the deadbolt and engaged the security latch. I heard loud banging on the door from outside. A few seconds later, Javon was screaming my name, hurling insults that then turned into pleas. His voice sounded weak, drowned out by the sound of the increasingly intense rain. I didn't move. I walked to the front window and, pulling the curtain aside slightly, peeked outside. In the yard, the three of them were shivering from the cold. The rain was falling harder and harder, soaking them in an instant. The trash bags were now sodden and looked even more miserable. Javon kept pounding on the door, hoping I would soften seeing his state, but he was wrong. Seeing them soaked seemed to wash the wounds of my heart. How many times had they left me alone in the rain waiting for an Uber after work, while Javon went off in my car to have fun with his boys? Now let them feel the cold of the rainwater down to their bones. The commotion in front of my house finally caught the neighbors' attention. The porch lights of the houses to the left and right began to flick on. Some neighbors opened their windows or stepped out onto their porches to see what was happening. Realizing he had an audience, Javon changed his strategy immediately. He was no longer hurling insults. Instead, he started shouting in a pitiful voice, trying to present himself as a victim. He yelled to the neighbors that I was a heartless wife, kicking out her sick husband and mother-in-law in the middle of the night. He acted as if he were an innocent victim, hoping the neighbors' compassion would make me open the door. "Help! Help us, please! My wife has gone crazy! My mother has a heart condition! Don't let us die out here!" Javon screamed, pointing at the door of the house. Ms. Eudora, with her strong, dramatic instinct, collapsed immediately onto the wet ground of the porch and pretended to faint. Takara also sat down next to her and started shaking her mother's body while crying loudly, creating a dramatic scene. Some neighbors started murmuring. I saw the HOA president, who lived 3 houses down, approaching with an umbrella. I knew I couldn't let Javon twist the facts. I grabbed my phone and called the estate security gatehouse. After 2 rings, I heard the deep voice of the head of security, Mr. Jefferson. I asked Mr. Jefferson and his team to come to my house immediately because there was a disturbance disrupting the public order. I explained that strangers were causing a scene on my porch and disturbing the peace of the neighbors. Shortly after, 2 patrol cars appeared with blue lights flashing. Mr. Jefferson and 2 of his men stepped out quickly. They approached the porch where the Javon family drama was in full swing. I gathered my courage to open the door just enough to speak to Mr. Jefferson without Javon being able to enter. "Mr. Jefferson, please control these people," I said loudly so my voice could be heard over the rain and reach the gossiping neighbors. "These people are no longer residents of this house. We have separated, and this house is my sole property, as stated in the property records. They are trying to break in and causing a scene that bothers the neighbors. Please escort them out of the community." Javon stood with his mouth open. He tried to defend himself to Mr. Jefferson. "Sir, this is my house. My wife is upset right now. Don't listen to her." But Mr. Jefferson was a professional security guard who had been working here a long time. He knew perfectly well who paid the HOA fees and the common utilities on time every month. It was me, not Javon. He had also seen Javon come home drunk many times, or bring friends over and throw loud parties that provoked complaints from the neighbors. Mr. Jefferson's sympathy was clearly not with Javon. "I'm sorry, Mr. Javon. Ms. Aziza is the legal owner of this house and has requested that you leave. Please do not disturb the neighbors at this hour," Mr. Jefferson said firmly, grabbing Javon by the arm. "We will escort you to the main entrance." Javon tried to resist, but the strength of the 2 burly security guards was much greater. Ms. Eudora, who was pretending to be fainted earlier, suddenly regained consciousness and stood up, fearing the guards would drag her out. They were escorted out of the yard like prisoners. Javon's face was now red with shame for being the spectacle of the neighbors looking at him with disdain. His performance as the aggrieved husband had failed completely. When they reached the street, Javon stopped suddenly, as if remembering something. He turned around and shouted at me, still standing in the doorway. "The car keys! Where are the car keys? My wallet and the car keys are still inside. Throw me the keys. At least let me take the car." I smirked and shook my head slowly. I stepped forward a bit so he could see my face clearly under the porch light. "The car? Which car are you referring to, Javon?" "The black SUV," he exclaimed. "Oh, that one?" I exclaimed, feigning innocence. "In case you didn't know, that car is in my name. And I paid the last note last month with my bonus check, so it's my car. I hid the keys in a place you'll never find. You don't have a single millimeter of right to that car." But I need the car. Where do you want us to go in this rain?" Javon screamed in frustration. His voice cracked amidst the thunder. "That is no longer my business," I replied coldly. "Walk. The exercise will do you good. You've barely moved lately. Or call a cab. Oh, I forgot. You left your wallet inside. And all the credit cards in that wallet are my supplementary cards that I canceled from the app 5 minutes ago. So having that wallet wouldn't do you any good anyway." Javon was left speechless. His face was white as cotton. He realized how perfect his ruin was that night. No house, no car, and not a single penny. Mr. Jefferson signaled his men to keep moving them away. "That's enough, sir. Let's go. Don't bother Ms. Aziza anymore," the guard reprimanded Javon. Ms. Eudora and Takara finally accepted that they were being kicked out of the luxury house they had lived in, like parasites. They walked stumbling under the torrential rain, dragging the black trash bags that were now their only possession. I closed the door again and slid the bolt. Outside, the rain continued to pound loudly, but here, inside my house, the atmosphere felt so peaceful and warm. For the first time in 5 years, I felt like I had truly come home. I felt like a heavy weight pressing on my shoulders had disappeared completely. I leaned back against the door. I sighed deeply and smiled. Tonight, I would sleep peacefully, very peacefully. The gate of the luxurious gated community closed firmly behind them, like a wall separating the comfortable life they had just left from the hellish world that now awaited them. The rain didn't stop. On the contrary, it raged with even greater fury, accompanied by a freezing wind that soaked through to the bone. Javon, Ms. Eudora, and Takara stood shivering on the empty sidewalk. The only roof protecting them from the rain was the leafy trees on the street, which dripped even more water. The 3 of them looked like sewer rats washed away by the current, wet, dirty, and miserable. The black trash bags, which had become their only possession, felt heavier and heavier as rainwater seeped through the poorly tied openings. They walked aimlessly down the flooded sidewalk. The dim light of the street lamps illuminated their desperate faces. Javon patted down his pants pockets over and over, hoping for a miracle in the form of a forgotten bill or a debit card that had been saved. But there was no luck. The pockets were empty. His expensive leather wallet, containing his ID, driver's license, debit, and credit cards, had stayed on the nightstand in the bedroom. Aziza had calculated everything meticulously. Without that wallet, Javon was nobody. He couldn't rent a hotel room, nor buy food, not even a hot tea at a convenience store. His identity and financial access were now locked in the house that was forbidden to him. Ms. Eudora started delirious from the cold. Her teeth chattered, and her lips started turning blue. The woman, who always maintained an impeccable appearance with thick makeup, now looked old and frail. The remains of makeup running from the rain had left black stains under her eyes, giving her a grotesque appearance. With a broken voice barely audible over the rain, she blamed Javon. She cursed her son's stupidity for not knowing how to control his wife. According to Ms. Eudora's twisted logic, all this hadn't happened because they had oppressed Aziza for years, but because Javon hadn't been strict enough with her. Takara walked limping behind. One of the caps on her high heels had broken when she stepped in a pothole on the sidewalk. Now she had no choice but to limp, holding the expensive shoes, now useless, in her hand. Finally, they found a strip mall with an overhang wide enough to shelter from the rain, although the stores were closed. Without saying a word, they dropped their exhausted bodies onto the cold, dusty concrete. Javon leaned against the cold metal shutter. His stomach growled loudly. Hunger began to attack cruelly. The last time they had eaten was at lunch, and tonight they expected the banquet Aziza had prepared for them. Ironically, they received an unforgettable dinner. Although it wasn't food that could be chewed, the illusion of a hot plate of rice and sides now floated before Javon's eyes. torturing him slowly. Takara, who pulled out her phone with the slightly cracked screen, tried to call an Uber with the 10% battery she had left, but her fingers stopped over the screen. She realized the payment method in the app was directly linked to Aziza's supplementary credit card. With trembling hands, she tried to make the booking, and as expected, a transaction failed notification appeared on the screen. Aziza had blocked everything. Takara called her high society friends for help. The first call wasn't answered. The second was rejected. The third call was answered by a friend, Rowena, but as soon as Takara told her she had been kicked out of the house and needed to borrow money, Rowena made an excuse saying she had bad signal and hung up. Takara, frustrated, threw her phone on the ground, hugged her knees, and cried bitterly. That night was terribly long and painful. They couldn't sleep a wink. Mosquitoes started biting their damp skin. Every now and then they were startled by the noise of a passing car. Every time a luxury car passed, Javon's heart shrank. He remembered his black SUV, now resting comfortably in Aziza's garage. In the silence of the night, as dawn approached, Ms. Eudora moaned, clutching her stomach, which twisted from indigestion and hunger. There was no medicine, no blankets, no hot water. Javon could only look at his mother with a blank stare. Guilt started to peek through, but his enormous ego pushed it aside immediately and replaced it with hatred toward Aziza. He swore revenge as soon as the sun rose. The morning brought a radiant sun, but it didn't warm their hearts. Their bodies were stiff and sore in every joint. A smell of mildew emanated from their drying clothes. Passers-by looked at them with disgust, considering them the new homeless people in the area. A shopkeeper coming to open his store shooed them away roughly, splashing a bucket of water at their feet to make them move. With the little dignity they had left, they moved their things to a park bench not far away. While they sat on the park bench enduring the increasing hunger, Takara distractedly opened social media with the little data she had left. Her eyes widened when she saw an Instagram story Aziza had just uploaded 15 minutes ago. Takara showed the phone screen to Javon and Ms. Eudora. On the screen, with the background of a dining table in a clean and elegant apartment, was a photo of a bowl of special chicken soup with abundant ingredients and a cup of hot tea. In a corner of the photo, there was a small text that read, "The best breakfast is a parasite-free breakfast, a blessing to be thankful for." Seeing the photo, Javon's stomach churned violently, not just from hunger, but from the envy and rage exploding in his chest. While they suffered on the street like trash, Aziza was enjoying her life. The reality without his wife's wallet was terrible. The world was no longer kind, and they were nothing more than worthless dust. Javon decided he couldn't give up like this. He still had a job. Yes, he was still the marketing team lead at an office supply distribution company, although his position wasn't very important and his salary was tight, which he often squandered on small online bets behind Aziza's back. He thought if he managed to get to the office, he could ask the company for an advance or borrow money from a colleague to at least get a cheap room for his mother and sister. He had to save the last shred of prestige he had left as a man. He left Ms. Eudora and Takara in the park, promising them he would return at lunchtime with money and food. On a venture, Javon walked 2 miles to his office. He stopped by a public restroom to wash his face and fix his messy hair. He couldn't get rid of the mildew smell from his heavily wrinkled shirt, but at least he wiped his muddy shoes with a wet paper towel. His appearance was too pitiful to be a team lead, but he had no other choice. Upon arriving at the office lobby, the receptionist looked at him with a furrowed brow. Usually, Javon came to work in impeccable clothes, expensive cologne, and a sharp style Aziza had helped him create. Today, he looked like he had just survived a natural disaster. Javon ignored the strange look and headed straight for the elevator. Inside the elevator, 2 employees from another department subtly covered their noses and whispered something to each other while eyeing Javon sideways. Javon pretended not to notice and stared ahead with a stone face. His heart was pounding. He feared the secret of his poverty would be discovered. As soon as he reached his desk, before he could sit down, an HR employee was standing there with a serious face. "Mr. Javan, the director and the head of HR are waiting for you right now in the conference room," the employee said without smiling. Javan's mood soured instantly. Usually these sudden calls weren't a good sign. With hesitant steps, he followed the employee to the conference room at the end of the hall. Inside, the director and the HR manager were waiting for him with a pile of documents on the table. Their faces were cold and showed no kindness. Javan sat in the indicated chair and, even though his lips were trembling, tried to force a friendly smile. "What's going on, Director? Why the urgent call in the morning?" he asked, playing clueless. The director threw a blue folder at Javan. "No need for excuses. We've been conducting an internal audit for a week and found numerous irregularities in the financial reports of the marketing team you lead." Javan's heart seemed to stop. With sweaty hands, he opened the folder. Inside was proof of embezzlement of operational funds, falsification of gas receipts, and even inflated expenses for meals with clients that never existed. All this time, Javan had been siphoning money from the company little by little to cover his personal expenses or pay his gambling debts. Before, whenever there was a discrepancy in the cash, coincidentally, Aziza, who worked as a certified public accountant at a prestigious accounting firm that was the external audit consultant for this company, would fix his reports or even cover the deficit with her own money to protect her husband's career. Aziza had done it to save face for her husband, but now that protective shield was gone. Aziza was no longer covering up the skeletons Javan hid. On the contrary, maybe she was the one who gave the signal to the internal audit team to investigate Javan's department more thoroughly. I can explain, Director. It's just a clerical error." Javan excused himself, nervous. Cold sweat started running down his temples. "A clerical error?" The HR manager snorted. $50,000 have disappeared in 6 months, and you call that a clerical error? We checked with the restaurants and gas stations you attached. All these receipts are fake. And what's worse, we've also received information that you've been using company supplies for personal purposes. "Mr. Javan," the director interrupted him with a loud and firm voice, "the company cannot tolerate this type of criminal behavior. Effective today, you are terminated with cause. You will not be paid a single cent of severance because the company's losses are greater than what you are owed. And one more thing, if you don't return those $50,000 in 48 hours, we will take this case to legal authorities. The police will come looking for you." Javan's world collapsed in an instant. Fired with cause, no severance, threat of jail. He slumped in the chair. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. It was over. His only lifeline had just snapped. He tried to beg, even knelt at the director's feet and cried, forgetting his pride. But the decision was firm. They called 2 security guards to remove Javan from the building. The scene of the expulsion from the night before repeated itself. This time, at his workplace, Javan was dragged between the desks of his colleagues, who looked at him with a mix of surprise and disgust. The whispers were loud. The news of his corruption spread like wildfire. They forced him to put his personal items in a cardboard box. He didn't have many valuable things on his desk, just a photo of himself posing as if he were a successful man. When Javan walked out of the office building lobby with the box in his hands, his eyes caught an image that tightened his chest and made it hard to breathe. A luxurious silver sedan pulled up right in front of the VIP entrance of the building next door, a much more prestigious business center. The car door opened, and the figure of a woman he knew very well appeared. It was Aziza, but this Aziza looked very different. She was wearing an elegant, modern-design business suit. Her hair was impeccably styled, and she wore sunglasses that gave her a very distinguished air. She walked with confidence, accompanied by 2 assistants carrying briefcases. Aziza was going to a meeting with an important client. Her career was on the rise. Javan wanted to shout his wife's name. He wanted to run toward her, but his feet felt heavy as if nailed to the ground. He saw his reflection in the building's glass, disheveled, dirty, smelly, and holding an old box. In contrast, Aziza shone like a diamond freshly cleaned of mud. At that moment, Aziza glanced sideways in his direction. Behind those dark sunglasses, Javon felt a sharp, penetrating gaze. Aziza didn't stop, didn't wave, didn't even show an expression of surprise. She simply turned her head and continued her way toward the skyscraper, leaving Javon stuck like a true loser on the hot sidewalk. The collapse of Javon's career was the piece that perfectly completed his suffering, while the woman he had neglected was now flying so high she was unreachable. Javon returned to the park with heavy steps, as if carrying a ton of weight on his feet. The midday sun was scorching and burned the back of his neck, unprotected by the collar of his already dirty, sweat-smelling shirt. In his hands, he clutched the box with his personal office items tightly, a symbol of his failure he would now have to carry everywhere. During the walk, his stomach wouldn't stop growling, twisting in pain and begging to be filled. But that hunger was nothing compared to the fear now gripping his throat. He had to face his mother and sister with no money, no food, and worst of all, with the news that he was now unemployed with a criminal record at his company. When he arrived at the park, he found a miserable scene. Ms. Eudora and Takara were huddled on a park bench with peeling paint. They looked like withered plants, as if they had been yanked from the earth by force. Miss Eudora was massaging her swollen legs while Takara fanned her face with a piece of torn cardboard, looking moody and annoyed. When they saw Javon appear in the distance, their faces lit up for a moment. The hope of a sandwich and cold water shone clearly in their eyes. Takara even forgot the pain in her legs and stood up to receive her brother, extending her hands as if asking for her share. But that hope vanished when Javon arrived in front of them and let the box he was carrying fall to the ground with a dull, miserable thud. Javon didn't dare look them in the eyes. He lowered his head and looked at his shoes, once shiny but now covered in street dust. With a choked voice, Javon confessed everything. He told them about his firing, the company audit that had revealed his irregularities, the threat of going to jail if he didn't return the money, and the fact that he hadn't received a cent of severance. For a moment, a deathly silence took over the three of them, in contrast to the noisy traffic on the road behind the park. And then the crying and rage exploded. Ms. Eudora screamed hysterically, not caring about the people passing by the park. She hit Javon's arm with the little strength she had left, blaming her proud son for being so careless and stupid. She lamented her luck, having to be homeless at her age, comparing her life to her church friends, who at that hour were probably napping in an air-conditioned room. Unfiltered insults flew from Ms. Eudora's mouth. The same harsh words she used to direct at Aziza, she now vomited entirely onto Javon. Takara was no less cruel. She kicked the box with Javon's things, causing the contents to spill. She insulted her brother, calling him a useless man who only brought trouble to the family. In this desperate situation, the mask of a united family they boasted about so much to Aziza collapsed completely. There was no longer affection or mutual support, only the selfish survival instinct of each individual. They blamed each other for the sudden poverty that had befallen them. Takara blamed Javon for embezzling funds. Javon blamed Takara and Ms. Eudora for pushing him to embezzle with their lavish lifestyle. And Ms. Eudora blamed the two of them for not having found rich spouses to take care of their lives. When the fight, which had left them exhausted and even hungrier, subsided, Javon made a desperate decision. He took off the luxury watch he wore on his wrist, the only valuable item he had left that Aziza hadn't confiscated because he was wearing it when she kicked them out. He also forcibly demanded the gold earrings Takara was wearing. Although Takara resisted and screamed no, Javon and Ms. Eudora forced her with the excuse that it was to buy food and rent a cheap room. Finally, with a face full of anger and resentment, Takara handed over the earrings. Javon went to a pawn shop some distance from the park and sold the watch and earrings to a street buyer. Since he didn't have the certificate of authenticity and needed the money urgently, the items sold for a price far below their original value. Javon had no choice but to accept an amount of cash sufficient for a few simple meals for a few days and to rent a cramped room in a dirty neighborhood for a week. That afternoon they rented a room by the day in a narrow alley, muddy and smelling of sewage. The room was tiny, barely fitting a thin foam mattress sagging in the middle. The walls were damp with mold, and there were no windows, just a small vent above the door. The bathroom was outside and shared with other tenants who looked at them with suspicion. For Ms. Eudora and Takara, used to Aziza's luxurious, fragrant, and clean house, this place was hell. Ms. Eudora complained constantly about the damp smell, the roaches scurrying by, the hot air with only a small, dusty fan. That night they ate some boxed meals they bought at a rundown corner store. The atmosphere at dinner was somber, without conversation. They ate greedily because they were hungry, but their faces were full of mutual hatred. After dinner, Javon hid the remaining money from the sale of the watch and earrings under the pillow, intending to keep it safe. He planned to use that money as capital to look for odd jobs the next day. Physical and mental exhaustion made Javon and Ms. Eudora fall asleep quickly on the thin mattress, snoring. However, Takara didn't sleep. Her eyes stared fixedly at the ceiling of the room, full of cobwebs. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. She looked with disgust at her mother and brother, who slept with their mouths open. She felt she didn't deserve to be in this filthy place. She thought she was still young, pretty, and deserved to live comfortably. She hated Javon for not being a support and felt the weight of having to take care of her mother, who was starting to get sick from stress. A demonic whisper began to infiltrate her mind. If she stayed with them, the money would run out in a week and they would starve together. But if she kept the money for herself, maybe she could run away to another city, find an old friend or another man to take advantage of. Slowly, with very careful movements not to make the mattress creak, Takara slid her hand under Javon's pillow. Her heart was pounding. She felt the envelope with the money, pulled it out slowly. Javon moved slightly in his sleep, and Takara froze with fear. But Javon only changed position and went back to snoring. Takara managed to get the envelope out. She immediately put it in her purse and quietly stuffed her clothes into the black plastic bag. Without looking back at her mother and brother, who had betrayed her, Takara slipped out of the room and disappeared into the darkness of the narrow alley, taking the family's only hope of survival with her. The next morning, Javon's scream broke the silence of that dirty alley. He woke up and discovered there was nothing under the pillow. The money was gone. He looked around. Takara and her things were missing too. Ms. Eudora woke up startled by Javon's scream. When Javon told her Takara had run off with all their money, Ms. Eudora at first didn't believe it. She refused, saying her darling daughter couldn't be so cruel. But the truth was evident. The door wasn't forced, and there were no signs of a break-in. It had clearly been an inside job. Ms. Eudora broke down crying. This time her crying was truly heartbroken. She screamed Takara's name, the daughter she had always pampered, the daughter who was now abandoning her like trash to save herself. Javon, with his emotions at the limit, went into a rage. He punched the damp wall of the room, drawing blood from his hand. He cursed Takara with harsh words. The pain of being betrayed by his own blood was much more painful than having been kicked out by his wife. At least Aziza had a clear reason to hate them. But Takara was part of them. Now the parasite eats the other parasite. Their ruin was even more complete when the landlord came knocking on the door, angry because the early morning commotion was disturbing the other neighbors. Seeing Javon out of his mind, the landlord got scared and kicked them out immediately. The rent for the week had been stolen by Takara, and it turned out Javon hadn't paid it in full yet, only a deposit the night before, and they were kicked out again. This time they had absolutely nothing left. Absolute zero. Ms. Eudora walked stumbling with a lost gaze. The strong shock of her daughter's betrayal caused her health to worsen drastically. Her face was pale, and she was sweating cold. Javon had to hold his mother up while they walked down the hot street. In the midst of extreme despair, Javon remembered the only place that was once his home. A stupid hope arose in his mind that maybe Aziza had calmed down by now. Maybe Aziza would feel compassion seeing the state of his mother, who looked like the living dead. With the last strength he had left, Javon took his mother and walked several miles to the luxury-gated community where Aziza lived. When they arrived, the sun was about to set. They looked like beggars. The security guard at the gate recognized them and looked at them with suspicion. But Javon begged him, saying he wouldn't enter, that he only wanted to see the house from afar. Javon stood on the other side of the street, facing his former home. The house looked dark and silent. Aziza's car wasn't in the garage. The yard was clean and the lawn manicured. But there was one thing that made Javon's knees go weak instantly. In front of the fence, a large sign was staked into the ground, a flashy yellow sign with big red letters that read, "For sale, urgent, contact number." Javon's hope shattered. Aziza hadn't just kicked them out. She was selling the house full of memories to erase any trace of them from her life. The house was empty. Aziza had gone somewhere else, taking her success and happiness with her, leaving Javon and his mother truly alone in this cruel world. Javon collapsed onto the asphalt and, hugging his mother's knees, wept silently under the shadow of the house he had once abandoned. For Aziza, the days following the expulsion of Javon and his family